post that after the session. Okay, perfect. The recording is started, and let me share my screen as well. Perfect. Thank you for joining this call. And this call is all about, introduction of, DevOps with the Salesforce DX. And we are very lucky today that we have Rene today with us, and he is going to share his, knowledge with us. And we are really excited for that. So let me quickly, thank you our sponsor, Appirio and Cloud Bandana. They are sponsoring us, and really thank you guys for helping us so that we can, continue with this type of session in future as well. Quick introduction of myself. My name is Sudipta Dev, and I'm a Salesforce technical architect with Appirio. I'm a Salesforce Lightning champion. I have my blog, which is listed here. I am also 8x Salesforce certified application architect, group leader of Kitchener CA developer group. I have around 324 badges, and this is my Twitter handle. And I would not like to, waste any time, and I will hand over this to Rene, and continue from there. Rene, I'm making you the presenter now.
Yeah.
You should have the full control now.
Perfect. So let me get full screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. So hello everybody, my name is Rene Winkelmeyer. I work for Salesforce as a developer evangelist. This picture is not really up to date. If you see me in real life, you will see me with less hair and more beard right now. So that reminds me that I have to update this pretty soon. Welcome to this session around DevOps and Salesforce DX, which are really two interwove topics that we get a lot of requests from customers, from partners, from developers. How can they actually start to build their own continuous integration, continuous deployment, delivery pipeline with all the different capabilities that Salesforce DX offers? And that also contains a lot of questions around when do I have to use scratch arcs? Can I use a DevOps pipeline also with my sandboxes? How do I move all the things to production? And the big answer is it depends. And we'll go through the presentation and a lot of live demo through all the different options that you have, so that you hopefully will get an idea how you can get started with that. As I said, this is the agenda that we put roughly together. Like, I will give you a brief overview around what Salesforce DX means. I think that's pretty much important because the messaging that we had as a company changed over the last 2 years. Then I will go through a workflow, how you can develop against any type of org, which I think is super important, especially when you look at more mature orgs. And then we will take a look how you can actually build a DevOps pipeline. What does it mean? What could be the steps that you may have to consider when building such a pipeline? And I think the most exciting part for me is always Q&A, because you will have a lot of questions. I hope so. And I am really looking forward to answer them. Okay, so let's start. Intro to DevOps for Salesforce DX. I think, standard slide. Forward-looking statement. You know that from our Salesforce presentations. We are a publicly traded company, so any buying decision that you make, please make that based on what is currently available in product. So when we look back, what happened really in the last last years, one thing really stands out. It was fairly before I started with Salesforce, is that we in general changed app development, right? And if you're all Salesforce developers, you know that you don't want to spend your time with provisioning resources, guaranteeing application availability, hardening an application, all the things that are necessary on a legacy application. That's not what we as Salesforce really want to provide, right? I mean, the power of the platform is really that you and your teams don't need to spend time building and maintaining any infrastructure to support your apps, and you can really spend your time delivering value to customers and to your business. But also when it comes to delivering apps, your team shouldn't have to change its priority. Coming myself from a non-Salesforce background, but from a Java background, it was like, okay, now I have this Salesforce platform, which really helps me to build, really concentrate, focus on building applications and driving business value. But what about the toolings, right? It's, I had this undeployment tool, I had the fast.com IDE. It was really like 3 years ago when I started. But this is not how you actually build and deploy on large-scale enterprise applications. Now, this has changed recently, right? We at Salesforce started to provide development processes that really helps every kind of organization, no matter how they want to proceed, to choose a process that really fits for that organization. And we have, 2 distinct names for that. First of org development, and we have package-based development. And then we'll talk about these in detail a bit later. With these tools and features, Salesforce DX really aims to make development better for everyone, right? For every kind of org. Whether you're delivering apps for a single, highly specialized org, or a complex group of orgs, right? Your team should really be able to use a standard set of tools and a shared and common set of industry standards and also best practices to deliver apps to production without really sacrificing the abilities to focus on value rather than the basics of your infrastructure. Now, building on the platform can also, mean several different development experiences. You have, powerful builders. They can be schema builder, process builder, the brand new flow builder, which I think is pretty cool because it's not Flash-based, or prediction builder. They offer really great UI-based tools for platform development. And you also have the developer console for, lightweight, simple IDE-like experiences. But that doesn't talk about the delivery experience. And this is really where Salesforce DX brings together all the tools and functionality you and your team will need to build and deliver applications on the Salesforce platform. And we built Salesforce DX to really be open and prescriptive, so really based on proven, widely adopted standards. And they're really familiar to many developers, right? And especially looking at the application or life management cycle. And we built it for automated delivery. The Salesforce CLI is a key part of the whole DX story. I mean, when we launched that a few years ago, we had a lot of like, oh my gosh, there's a CLI. I had no idea how to use this. But when you look at the broader industry, and no matter if it's like Maven builds in the Java world, or you do stuff with Node, as a JavaScript developer, they all have CLI tools, right? So we adopted this pattern to really empower developers on the Salesforce platform to leverage knowledge, best practices that are standard in any kind of IT industry. And we wanted to bring that also to Salesforce developers. Now, when we look what a typical app dev lifecycle is, right? I mean, Salesforce app delivery shares some pieces in common with other app delivery models, right? You start with awesome idea, you have business requirement, and you want to move that idea through a development process, and then ultimately into the hands of your users. And those of you, and you will be familiar with Salesforce development, right? You know that this delivery process, sorry, that was wrong. So this process really moves through specialized several environment types. Your sandboxes, right? You have a built environment, depending on your org, you have for testing, multiple staging, user acceptance testings, training environments. So really a lot of environments where you have to move your code from A to B to C to E up to G, or wherever your final production org lives. As anyone who really delivered an app knows, the actual lines between testing and development can start to blur, right? Especially as teams build and deliver apps at an even faster pace. And you will have multiple developers in multiple locations maybe that also maybe use a chef sandbox or have their own developer sandbox. So really different types of development environments. And in addition, I mean, we also at Salesforce offer several ways to move your changes between environments. You have UI-based change sets, you can do programmatic changes deployed by an API, and now the new capabilities that we offer with package-based deployments, right? So there are a lot of things that you can choose from, and with all these options, that can lead to complex change management and integration scenarios. And for most customers today, the ultimate source of truth for an app, for the changes coming into an app, they are bound to an org, whether that's an individual developer in a sandbox or someone doing user acceptance testing in a shared sandbox, or even user in production, right? There is no single source of truth across teams. Now, when you look at your org, you may find yourself looking at this chart in one circle or the other. And the big question is, how can we really move this forward to create your own DevOps experience, right? When there is no source of truth, when you want to avoid inconsistent deployments, and when you have those overlaps between different environments. Now, there are two things how you have to look at when you develop with Salesforce DX and when you want to start to delivering continuous integration, continuous deployment. First, we have a life cycle here on this chart with source. So having the metadata of your org, which can be a new base greenfield project or a certain distinct app that you extracted from the existing org, right? And move that into your source control system. Now, with source, you have your environment with code that can be a developer sandbox, like in this case. You will store that metadata in your source control system. And after the development process, when it moves up into higher environments, like for integration or for staging or for release, that is a process when a continuous integration or a continuous deployment system, whatever the terms are partially interchangeable, CI/CD, move along, right? You will see on the left on the slide that we use the force source deploy or the force source retrieve command for that, right? So you really move metadata using the CLI and then a CI and CD system using the execution of a CLI and actually real metadata deployments. Now, this is one option that you can use. The other option that you can use is you use packaging. Packaging is, and if you're an ISV, you likely know this model. Once you have developed your application, and this is in the code column, you will create a package based on the code that is also in your source control system. Now, with a package, it is that way that from that on, the package content won't change. And it has really the benefit that you can then move the metadata that you put into this package to your higher environments by just running a package installation on those higher environments, right? You won't deploy with a with a CLI to a sandbox or a partial sandbox. You would actually just run a package installation for such an environment. Now, do you have to make a decision for which methodology you want to proceed in your org? And I would say no, right? Because it really depends. If you have a mature org, 8 years old, with a lot of metadata, you will likely not start with packaging, right? You will likely start, extract parts of your metadata that you want to work with, and then deploy that with the usual mechanism with metadata API deploy using Salesforce CLI to your higher environments. But if you have greenfield projects, that's a real good option to get started with packaging because it simplifies the deployment process because in the higher environments, like built-in test environments, you don't have to select which metadata you want to deploy because you just deploy the package that has been created during your development process. Now, UI-based change sets, if you're looking for them, yes, they are still available. for promoting changes that are not contained in package version or that are not tracked in source, right? So you can really create your own mix and match. And if you start with Salesforce DX, it really depends where you want to start and how you want to apply that, right? There is no best recipe if you're looking for that, right? It's, you have to make a decision at some point for where you want to start in your org with which kind of app, and then make a selection which process really best fits your needs, right? We don't want to be too prescriptive with that. The benefits of unlock packages, and we use that in our sample apps a lot, is that it's really based on source-driven development. That means all metadata live primarily in source, right? As multiple developers, we work with our source in Git. We merge our changes, we do code reviews, all the things in source. And that really allows us to iterate on the best possible code for the business requirement that we want to solve. At the end, once we have our package created from that, it really simplifies how we can run this in CI and CD, and also helps us to organize all the metadata. And I will show you an example how we did this in one of our sample apps that will hopefully give you a great idea how to apply this pattern. Having said that, I think we should walk through a demo and actually show a few things live, how you can do this. For that, I crafted a small demo application. So what you see here is e-bikes. This is one of our sample apps in the Trailhead sample app gallery. This e-bikes, as you can see, it is in a standard org. It is not in a scratch org. And what I want to simulate here for you is how to work with metadata and some parts that include Salesforce DX. We have to talk about this a bit, how you can actually do this. So this is a standard product explorer, and you can just click a bike here, see the details on the right, and that's amazing. But actually, as a developer, I may want to have a filter here on the left side, right? Understand, there's no scratch org. This is a simulated sandbox. So how can I work with the tools that before can go with that in my CI/CD pipeline? How can I actually work with the tools that I have? For that, I am using Visual Studio Code, which is the IDE that we as Salesforce recommend. We built a bunch of Salesforce related extensions that you can install into VS Code, and that you can also use for developing against any kind of org. And I have to go back a bit in I think like 2 years ago when we launched that. The big thing that we at Salesforce said, like for Salesforce DX, you have scratch orgs, and now you can spin up your org. It's temporary. It's like between 1 and 30 days of duration. How you can work in this, and all the source that you have in that org needs to be in your source control system, and that that's pretty cool. But we heard a lot of feedback from customers like, yeah, that's great, but I have all the metadata in my org, and I can't just get everything out and build the dependencies and dissect that. So how can I start best in those environments? Now, over time, the tooling that is part of the Salesforce DX story, like VS Code and the Salesforce CLI, also evolved to allow, as I said before, everybody build and deploy and code against any kind of org. For those of you who are not familiar with VS Code, it has a lot of options. Once you install the Salesforce extensions for VS Code, you see a lot of SFDX related commands. Those most of those commands, I would like 95% or so, are just a user interface for executing commands against Salesforce CLI. Now, in this case, I don't need anything, but I want to open my product filter list, because on my eBags application, I was missing this list. So let me actually find this product tile list. There we go. And this is just a standard JavaScript file on a Lightning Web Component. It can be also an Apex class or a standard FlexiPage metadata, any kind of metadata that you want to work with. The benefit of the Salesforce extension for VS Code are, in this case, I'd like to highlight this, is that you really get the best possible support for all the things that we give you for local development or for local modification of your metadata. One of my favorites for working with Lightning Web Components and Apex, for example, is that I can just hover over my method name, and with my JavaScript file, I can see this context, the parameters that are available in Apex for me. And this is pretty exciting because I don't have to switch contexts back and forth. Now, going back to our simulated case, I have here something missing in my filter. I want to deploy, I want to change this. So actually, let me add the code that is needed. I hope this is the right one. I'm going to save that. And now I need to move this metadata to my org. And from this tooling in my development phase, I have two options. Either I can just do a right click, and this will be pretty small over here, but I can say deploy source to org, and it would deploy the selected source to my non-scratch org, right? And I think very important, to my non-scratch org. I am more a fan of the CLI, so I'm now entering the same command that my context menu within VS Code would execute now on the CLI. And this is just, SFDX for the Salesforce CLI for source deploy, and I'm giving it a parameter -m with the metadata type and the name of the metadata. Now, let me deploy that, and I hope it won't take too long. I'm just currently on VPN, and in Germany, it's a bit far to the US. There we go. I deployed just this part of metadata to my non-scratch org. So let me go over here and then go to App Builder, because I want to have some declarative changes over here. I'm going to add my product filter. It renders. Seems that I added everything correctly. Let's change the values. There we go. Works amazingly. Now, I changed now my Flexi page, and the next step as a developer would be to pull those changes out from my non-scratch org into my source system, right? And this is independent if you want to use standard metadata deployment later in the CI/CD process, or if you want to run a package-based deployment. So let me quickly go back to VS Code. I'm going to clear this out. And I could now go to my product, to my Explorer window over here, and find the type of metadata that I want to retrieve. But again, I'm a friend of the CLI, so let me run the counterpart of for source deploy, and this is for source retrieve. Again, -m flag with the metadata type and the name of the metadata. This one bit me sometimes, right? Flexi page. So if you want to run those commands, you really have to look up what is the definition in the metadata XML file. In my case, I always thought it was in lowercase p. So you may have to check them out. Now, in this case, I pulled the changed Flexi page down. I have everything now in source, and the next step for me would actually bring this into my source control system, with the standard git add, and then deploy that to GitHub, GitLab, whatever your preferred Git system is. I mean, there are so many available, and we are also not prescriptive with that. You really have to make the choice what is best for your environment. Could be, Microsoft Teams Studio Server and so forth. Now, let's actually look what it then means to run CI/CD, because we figured, we just did the first process, your initial development, and you're happy with, with the changes in your application, and you think everything is great right now. And now you want to move this to a higher environment. Now you want to have your users test this in user acceptance testings, for example. So let me quickly go to this tab. Right, so what you see here is also for our e-bikes sample application, CI pipeline that we set up based on a configuration that we define for all the trailer sample apps. The cool thing is, because they're all public repos, you can directly drill down into this configuration and also see all the execution and what they're doing. And I will walk through that too right now. It is important to know that we run a full build on every commit. That means once I'm, as a developer, happy with my changes, I'm going to push those changes to Git, in our case to GitHub, and then based on a pull request, the full flow kicks off. And the main benefit of this is we ensure that no wrong code, no bad code is actually merged at some point later, for example, into develop or master or whatever your branching strategy is, so that we can actually are ensured that whatever you see on the master branch, in our case, on the trailer sample apps, is clean and working code. Now, as you see, we have a bunch of steps involved, and I will go through the configuration in a bit. In this case, we're going to set up tooling, which is initial tools that we set. We run a pre-dev verification, which is pretty important for us. We auto format our code, and we just want to make sure that every developer who is involved in working with this application also obeys the formatting rules. The biggest benefit of this is when you have pull requests and you have 3 developers using 3 different formatting rules, you have a lot of PRs which are just about tab indentation in JavaScript files, and we really want to avoid that. We're going to lint our Lightning Web Components. This is also an important step. All Lightning Web Components have we provide capabilities where you can run ESLint rules against Lightning Web Components. You can ignore them if you want to, and they don't affect deployment to an org, but they include best practices, how you actually should code the JavaScript in your Lightning Web Component, and we want to make sure that those rules are not broken for any code that gets merged to a higher branch. Then we run unit tests for Lightning Web Components, was also pretty important. Actually, I hope you all write unit tests for in some capacity, and also for Lightning Web Components, it's pretty important. What you see here is also we run all those things, and they don't involve an org yet, right? They don't involve an org yet. You see here in the next step that we install Salesforce CLI. After all the other things around pre-dev verification or Lightning Web Components linting and unit testing, that has one big reason: we don't need an org yet, right? We can run all the things locally before we have actually an org. And just in terms of a CI/CD process, this is the most cheapest process, right? Because based on your org edition and so forth, you have a limited amount of active scratch orgs per day. And if Lightning Web Component unit testing would fail, like with every second pull request, but you would have already spun up a scratch org, it would be pretty bad for for all the amounts of scratch orgs that you have. So we want to move those things as early as possible in a CI/CD pipeline, that you can actually don't have to waste scratch orgs, but also if something happens in the stage, we wouldn't have done all the things with install the CLI, authenticate the dev app, and so forth. Now moving forward, we have this install the CLI. We are linting Aura code, if applicable, in your application. This is also something that can run locally on CI/CD. We are setting up all the different kinds of orgs. You will see that later in the configuration, as well as we are deploying the source. And in this case, we are deploying the source against a scratch org to see if the deployment is actually successful. We saw in our own experience while we worked against different kinds of apps, sample apps, internal demo apps, some production apps, that someone can easily work in an org in the UI and then forget to do the final pull, right? The final pull with one change. Everything looks great in source, everything is linted, everything is amazing, but then on deployment, it's failing. And so this is a real essential part of the CI/CD process before it hits UAT, for example, that the source that you have in your source actually deploys to an org. Then we run obligatory Apex tests. You don't have to do that. I think that it's a good behavior. You see that it doesn't take too much time. Some people also run things like static analysis with PMD to see, is our Apex code really clean, or do we obey best practices with naming and so forth. So basically that what we did with linting for Lightning Web Components early in the process, now here in Apex when we have an org. And as we're good citizens, we are cleaning up a scratch org. Now, this is the process that we run on every pull request before actually we deploy that to a higher sandbox or before we go to create a package, right? Now, let's take a look at the configuration for this. And I will go to my setup over here and my config YAML. Let's close also this so you can see a bit more. We're using for the sample apps Circle CI, which is, it's free for open source projects. You really can pick the tool that you want to choose, or which is in your company. That can be Azure, the Azure pipelines, that can be Jenkins, AppWeyer, GitLab, you name it. At the end, it doesn't matter, because the underlying tooling for everything that you do with CI/CD is based on what you run with Salesforce CLI. So let's walk you through a bit through the steps. And you remember the card that we had. We set up tooling, which is like the base process for everything when it comes. What we define as a base process when it comes to everything that we do with Lightning Web Components. And in that step, the important part is to run an npm install, right? So Node Package Manager is the tooling of the choice for this CI/CD step, where we install all the node dependencies that we need for the later steps. Depending on your CI and CD system, you may have to persist everything that you installed also to a temporary hard drive, which is what we do here in Circle CI. You may or may not have to do that, right? So this is also a decision that you have to make for your CI/CD processes. For how many distinct steps do you want to have, right? As you can see here, I have here also a step for my previous verification. And if I wanted to be lazy, I can just remove all this, and I can have multiple runs for several things just on within the setup tooling umbrella. But for our showcase configuration, we just don't want that, right? We think it's also more cleaner, and that if something fails at a certain step, like previous verification, we want to see that in a dashboard. We want to get especially the notification that it failed in that specific step, because that at the end also helps us to troubleshoot some failed deployments on CI/CD. Now, pre-verification is also pretty easy. It's an npm run pre-verify, and when you look at the configuration in any of the sample apps, you will see this command because it runs the pre formatter and verifies if any code base on Lightning Web Components and Aura components and Visualforce pages is actually the way that it should be formatted or not, right? And we run really this as part of our CI/CD process to ensure that we don't have at some point pull requests with 500 files in that, and the only change in it is just a tab indent, because I prefer 4 and the colleague prefers 2, right? And we've seen that likely a few times. I see a few questions coming up in the chat already. I will talk about that later, and pretty for Apex and Visualforce pages that are really good questions. We'll come to that. Linting Lightning Web Components, same procedure. Also the package JSON in the sample labs, we set up a standard command for npm run lint lwc, which will run ESLint rules. And as I said before, we do this as early in the stage as possible, so that we don't have to waste scratch arc allocation just for the step where we actually don't need that. The same as we know with unit testing, Lightning Web Components, pretty exciting topic. Just spoiler alert, next week on Tuesday, I will release a blog on developer.salesforce.com that goes in depth around best practices for unit testing Lightning Web Components. I think that's really a really exciting topic for a developer to have that. And it's also really important to have this in your CI/CD process, because you may want to have an average coverage of 60% for all your Lightning Web Components. And if a developer commits 5 Lightning Web Components and doesn't add tests for them, you may want that this code, this metadata, doesn't get merged, right? Please want to make sure that there's a certain set, certain quality in testing available. Otherwise, you just don't want to merge that. And CI/CD really helps you to surface those things in an automated way. Now, another step is in any CI/CD process is to install Salesforce CLI. And depending on how you want to run this, you either install the binary file, or what we did in this case. Some say it's a bit hacky, but I think it's a better option. For what we want to do is we just also run an npm install and install sfdx-cli, which is a package available on npm.js, right? It's just a CI installation at the end, which gives us access to all the different capabilities when it comes to interacting with Nork. Having said that, we have Aura linting. Again, we lint Aura commands with this. And then it's really about setting up the orgs that you want to use in your CI/CD process. And for us, we decided that the mandatory part is at least you need a DevOps, right? Without a DevOps, you won't be able to create your temporary scratch arc where you can deploy your test sort to. Every system like Circle CI stores authenticate or gives you the capability to store authentication data in an encrypted way. They provide some documentation around Circle CI and a few other CI systems, how you can actually set that up. This will also include, a step for decrypting, for example, what we use a certificate for authentication against our DevOps. And then we authenticate a DevOps, right? Because the CI/CD system doesn't know, compared to your local machine where you do your data development, which is the DevOps. How should I authenticate against it, right? And we use the JSON Web Token JWT mechanism against that, which you just have to run as part of every CI/CD process. What is interesting for here is that every CI/CD system gives you the capability, or usually gives you the capability, to run different commands based on different branches, right? So if you have a specific branching strategy, you can incorporate that in any part of your CI/CD process, and there will come in another example to that. So if we have, in our case, a branch which says pre-release / whatever, then we authenticate against another DevOps that we're going to use during pre-release phase, like sandbox before release goes live. Now, the other steps that we are doing is we define the CI org, and we define also a packaging org. So you saw in this card-based overview for Circle CI that there was no packaging step installed. And that was on purpose, because we run that on every pull request. But at some point, we are actually also testing, can we use the metadata, which is in source now, also to create our own package so that we then can proceed with package-based deployment. And in this case, we store data and assign it the alias for a packaging org, and we just create a blank one-day valid scratch org where we can just deploy our source to so that we can test our metadata deployment. And from here on, it's pretty straightforward. We're pushing the source to the org. We optionally have a command for create and test packages. We haven't seen that, but it's part of the script, so this is pretty nice. What we do actually is, to simplify things for us, we have a shell script, which is called packaging deployment, and I'll look into that in a bit. And if we are in a packaging process, we're just running the script based on that. So again, running Apex tests, force Apex test run, send a CI command, as well as cleaning up the scratch org. Now, when it comes to Circle CI, and what you saw above here, those are all job steps, right? Single steps. And the real magic happens when you define the workflow. There's the next section in this YAML file, how those steps actually should be executed, right? Because there's some things that you have to run always. And there are some things that you only want to run on pull requests, or that you only want to run when you're in a specific branch. And in this case, we have setup tooling. And what you see here is we're filtering on branch names. Like we don't run this on the master branch for this basic sample app. And this is something that you see, it's working, it's going through all the way through, that we don't run anything on master. It runs as well on any pull requests. Now, the next example that you will see is where we have a multi-package project, that we have a far more detailed setup for on which branches the test should, the individual job steps should actually run, or where they should run. And for that, I will go to Easy Spaces. So Easy Spaces is one of our other sample apps, and Easy Spaces is really built to be a showcase for a package-based project and deployment setup. What you see here is that we have 4 different package directories, right? So my colleague Zane Turner, she took a full app and she dissected the contents of these apps in 4 distant types of packages. Like we have objects that are shared across all higher packages. We have some code, we have styles, these lower packages, and the space management app really builds upon metadata that is stored in these other packages. Now, you can create this all by hand for a package process, but we actually wanted to incorporate this also in our CI/CD system. Now, when I go to our Circle CI configuration, which is looks pretty much like what you see before, because the steps that we involved are the same, right? Linting, set DX orgs, and so forth. It gets interesting when we define CI/CD orgs, because based on branching names, and this is like where this sample application really stands out when it comes to a DevOps approach, is that depending on the branch name, we are running different things, right? Is it a package, or is it a branch that is prepended with the word packaging? Okay, then we need a specific kind of org. Is it just a feature? So we're going to add features to this application. Then please use another kind of org. And when we then go further down, we have also multiple steps involved, right? We have package version creation included as part of our CI/CD process. And this is also really important to understand. I mean, you can have all your source locally and you can deploy that against any org, against a sandbox or against a scratch org. That's amazing. But if you, let me quickly bring this up. Some of your metadata may not be supported for packaging, right? So the metadata coverage report is where you can actually see if a specific type of metadata available for unlock packaging. So you can be amazing with the metadata API and everything works and address settings, everything looks great, and you decided beforehand that, hey, I want to use an unlock packaging. But with Spring 19, you will see in the metadata coverage report that, hey, there is not available for unlock packaging. Now, obviously, you may not always look up this report, right? And not everyone has it handy. So having the package version creation process as part of your CI/CD pipeline really helps you to unveil those things, right? To have no bad surprise just because you decided, in the last phase after user acceptance testing that you then want to use packaging. You just should find that out using CI/CD as soon as possible. Now we'll go, further down here. We have the, say based on different commands here, user acceptance testing, full copy sandbox. Now, when we look down here in the workflow section, you actually see that we also make use of this filtering based on branch names capability, where we run different things only based on the branch name. So I'll give you an example. We have deploy source, and we deploy the source to a scratch org to make this metadata test only in branches that start with feature. So /feature / my awesome edition, whatever. And in that phase, we only test against scratch orgs. This is, it's a real low environment where the developer actually tests. Now, once this was successful, we merge the changes from that specific branch into other branches. And if it's a change, for example, to objects, we merge that into a branch which is called packaging /es/base objects. And in this branch, this whole CI/CD process doesn't deploy source. It doesn't lint Aura, right? It only tests package deployment. It creates a new package version and it deploys that to a distinct org. So we actually can see that the package version creation process works. And on the other side, then we have also a test system where we can then test this specific package in, right? Because from here on, after we created the initial package version, it shouldn't be necessary to modify the source code at any stage. As you can see, we use these for all the different kinds of environments. So on the Easy Spaces app, Easy Spaces LWC on Trell apps, you will see the different kinds of setup that you can run for a package-based deployment. Now, you may wonder, how do I can learn more about that? And also, you're in your company, you're not using Circle CI. You're using Jenkins, for example. How can you get started with that, right? I mean, that's the most important start, because going through all the setup steps, even if they are similar across any CI/CD system, it may also take some time to actually figure out how you should set that up. What we really want to highlight here is, you should check out the CI using Salesforce DX module on Trailhead. It gives you a good overview and a good idea. But also, what you should check out is on github.com/force.com, because our product management recently started to add sample repos for most major CI/CD systems, like, in this case, AppBear, if you want to run something on Windows, Bitbucket, Jenkins, Circle, and there are a few other already included, right? They're already available, already open source. So if I go here for SFDX Bitbucket package, a really good example, it's really new that we started to make them public is like you get a full walkthrough. If you want to run a Bitbucket, what are your steps? How do you run your credential encryption on those things? How should a setup look like? And all the different parts of setup steps that are really important or needed when you want to run these things on your CI/CD system. I see that we have only a few minutes left, so Sudipta, I think we should go to Q&A. Just seeing.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I see two questions in the chat. So the first question is, Salesforce DX develop against any org feature? Is that GA already for our customers or still in beta? So it is currently in beta, but as far as I know, going GA is coming soon. So summer is not that far away, right? It's pretty, it's rock solid, it's pretty tested. We work with that command in many different scenarios, and they work really great. And the other question is, do we have Prettier for Apex and Visual Force pages? And I have to say the good answer is yes, mostly. So there are two things. If you look at the sample apps, we have a Prettier RC file in there, and as you can see, this also includes the Visual Force. So using Visual Studio Code and the Salesforce extensions with Prettier and with a setup that you can then get from the Trello sample apps, you can actually use that against Visual Force pages. If you want to use that for Apex, that is not there yet. Let me quickly find it for you, and it was this one. So there's actually a community contribution on dengmei/Prettier plugin Apex, and we worked with that person to build the Prettier formatter. And you can use this one to actually run Prettier formatter against Apex, right? So this won't come from us, as far as I know, because there's already this amazing community contribution that you can leverage for formatting Apex.
Good. Hey, Rene, I have one quick question. Can you open your Visual Studio Code?
Yep.
And the console from the top, from the below. Yeah, you see this, green, yellow, and blue one, right? I'm struggling to bring that on my Visual Studio Code. I don't know, like, what plugin that.
Oh, that so I get this question so often. I get this question so often. So what I'm using actually on my Mac is ZShell, and this is Oh My ZShell. I get this question so often, right? Oh My ZShell, it's a free plugin that you can get for ZShell, and it allows you to customize your terminal, really, right?
Okay.
So when you scroll down, I think there, it has some standard in there. Plus, I added my own thing that I have, like, also in my standard terminal over here, so that I always know, like, which is my directory, which is my current Git branch, and do I have a default org for Salesforce DX set? Right. This is what
Okay. That's good. It's good to know. Yeah. Now I have the answer. Good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. If there are no more questions, I have another webinar in 5 minutes. I'm just saying. So
right. Yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you, Rene. And guys, like, this session recording and slide will both be posted very soon. And there is another session coming up in next 5 minutes where Rene is talking about the Lightning Wave component. It's in Apex Hour. Please join that. It's going to be a very interesting session again. And again, Rene, thank you for all your help, all your sharing knowledge. Really helpful for the
You're welcome.
community.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a great Saturday.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, have a good Saturday. Bye-bye.